Yemen's Houthis are turning up the heat on US oil giants, sanctions against ExxonMobil and Chevron, attacks on ships in the Gulf of Aden, and a direct strike on a Dutch cargo vessel. This is not just retaliation, it's a message. As the waters of the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden burn, the world watches, wondering what comes next. Yemen's Houthi rebels say they're hitting back at Washington with new sanctions. The move targets major US oil giants, including ExxonMobil and Chevron, along with 9 corporate executives and 2 ships. According to the Sanaa-based Humanitarian Operations Coordination Center, the sanctions are framed as retaliation against penalties the US imposed on the Houthis earlier this year. The HOC, set up last year to coordinate between Houthi forces and commercial shipping operators, made the announcement on September 30th. These US sanctions came despite a truce agreement brokered with the Trump administration, under which the Houthi rebels had agreed to halt attacks on US-linked shipping in the Red Sea and the wider Gulf of Aden. ExxonMobil declined to comment on the sanctions, while Chevron did not immediately respond. Mohammed al-Bashar, an independent Middle East analyst, suggested the impact of these sanctions remains uncertain.
It remains unclear whether these sanctions signal that the Huthis will begin targeting vessels linked to the sanctioned organizations, companies, and individuals, a move that would risk violating the ceasefire agreement with the Trump administration, facilitated by Oman.
Since 2023, the Houthis have carried out numerous assaults on vessels in the Red Sea, targeting ships they perceive as linked to Israel. They say these attacks are in solidarity with Palestinians in the ongoing conflict with Israel. However, the US Energy Information Administration notes that these operations have had minimal effect on vital oil tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping corridor connecting the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. The Houthis have occasionally targeted vessels in the Gulf of Aden, a strategic passage between the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea. On September 29th, the Iran-backed rebels claimed responsibility for a cruise missile strike on a Dutch cargo ship, injuring 2 crew members and leaving the vessel ablaze and adrift. Last year, the United States imported approximately 500,000 barrels per day of crude and condensate from Gulf countries via the Strait of Hormuz, representing around 7% of total US imports, the lowest level in nearly 4 decades, owing to increased domestic production and imports from Canada. Al-Bashar assessed that the sanctions are unlikely to disrupt the oil market, as much of the regional trade is conducted by Chinese, Russian, Iranian and other Gulf companies, with which the Houthis aim to maintain good relations.
This looks like a media stunt, a way to save face and reassure their people in light of mounting US sanctions and Israeli strikes that have been hurting their economy.
The HOC, in its statement, emphasized that the sanctions are intended to drive behavioral change rather than act as punitive measures, stressing that the ultimate goal of the sanctions is not punishment in itself, but to bring about positive behavioral change. On October 1st, the Houthis claimed responsibility for a cruise missile attack on the Dutch-flagged cargo ship Minervagracht in the Gulf of Aden. This followed a string of assaults in the Red Sea since 2023, carried out under the pretext of targeting vessels linked to Israel and demonstrating solidarity with Palestinians. Houthi military spokesperson Yahya Sari described the attack in detail.
The naval force of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a military operation targeting the ship, owing to the violation of the entry ban to the ports of occupied Palestine by the company that owns the ship. The targeting operation took place in the Gulf of Aden with a cruise missile. The operation resulted in a direct hit on the ship, which caught fire and is now at risk of sinking.
The attack injured 2 crew members, prompting a helicopter evacuation of the ship's 19 personnel, according to the European Union's maritime mission Aspides and the vessel's operator. Amsterdam-based shipping company Splythoff confirmed the vessel was in international waters at the time and suffered substantial damage from the blaze. The Houthis justified the attack by citing the ship owner's alleged violation of an entry ban to the ports of occupied Palestine. This marked the first Houthi strike on a commercial vessel since September 1st, when they targeted the Israeli-owned tanker Scarlet Ray near the Saudi Red Sea port of Yanbu. In 2024, the Yemeni rebels also attacked and sank 2 vessels in the Red Sea, the bulk carrier Magic Seas and cargo ship Eternity Sea, and previously struck the Singapore-flagged Libivia container ship in the Gulf of Aden. Syria reinforced the group's stated rationale for the attacks.
Our great, struggling, and steadfast Yemeni people continue and will continue to support and defend the oppressed Palestinian people against the crime of the century. The Yemeni armed forces affirm that their military operations are ongoing and will not be ceased until the aggression is halted and the blockade on the Gaza Strip is lifted.
Beyond the battlefield, the Houthis have expressed support for international initiatives advocating Palestinian liberation. On September 30th, Mahdi al-Mashat, chairman of Yemen's Supreme Political Council, praised Colombian President Gustavo Petro's recent UN proposal to create a global army tasked with ending what he described as US-backed Israeli occupation and aggression in Palestine. Mashat described Petro's proposal as both courageous and historic, reiterating Yemen's readiness to provide all forms of support for the cause.
President Gustavo Petro's proposal is courageous and historic. Yemen is ready to provide all forms of support for the liberation of Palestine.
Al-Mashat highlighted Yemen's existing engagement in what he described as the war against the Zionist enemy entity, including a naval blockade on Israeli ships and vessels heading to the occupied Palestinian territories. The Houthis' strategy blends military action, symbolic targeting, and political signaling, reflecting both domestic pressures and the influence of Iran-aligned regional actors. As the Houthis expand their operational footprint into the Gulf of Aden, the international community remains watchful for further escalation, particularly with the potential implications for US corporate interests, regional maritime security, and the fragile truce agreements that have been brokered in previous years.